Ahoy! Are you trying to play Tiamat but you're struggling or haven't fully figured it out yet? Then this video is for you. First of all, this is the spot you need to spam click if you want to insta-lock her in lobby. That may be necessary if you want to play in the first place. Aside of that, in this video we were talking about Tiamat's abilities and her leveling order both for middle lane and solo. Tiamat is extremely complex, and from what I've seen so far, even experienced players take quite a while to figure her out and get a feel for her. And that means that it takes quite a while to explain her full kit as well. While I originally wanted to include playstyle tips and builds in this video as well, it simply would not be possible to cover that all in a reasonable amount of time. So we're going to start with the first half, and tomorrow there will be the second part covering everything that's not covered in this one. Since she has a ton of abilities, let's get started. Her passive is Death Begets Life. While in her flying range stance, she gains health back if allies or enemies die nearby. This heal is 5 plus 0.5 for minions, so up to 15 per minion at level 20. This provides her with a decent amount of lane sustain even without going into further sustain items. Additionally, she has a large heal when enemy or ally guards die, which is 40 plus 8 per level, so up to 200 as a heal here. Especially for teamfights, it's important to keep in mind that this heal only happens during flying stance. If you're in the ground or melee stance, you get an effect called Hardened Scales. You will have one of these scales whenever you swap into that stance, and then multiple abilities allow you to receive more scales. Each scale has a shield value of 50 plus 10 per level, so up to 250. This shield doesn't fully shield you from damage, but provides a 60% damage mitigation. Without getting too technical here, the mitigation happens before the subtraction from the shield. So if you were to take 100 damage and 60% of that was mitigated, your shield would only take 40 damage and you'd still have 210 shield remaining. Therefore, she can get very tanky, especially if you have multiple stacks of the shield online. First ability in the range stance is Primordial Onslaught. This is a ranged projectile attack that changes when you level it up. Initially, it only fires up to 2 projectiles, then at the 3rd rank up to 4 projectiles, and at the 5th rank up to 6 projectiles. These projectiles need to be charged, which is indicated by the visual effect on Tiamat's back as well as the sound effect. Each spike that shows up represents one of her projectiles. So if you fire it immediately, you just fire 1 shot. If you charge a little bit, you fire 2 shots. And then if you have the corresponding ranks, you will fire more shots. The moment all the spikes that you can achieve on your rank have shown up, you can fire the ability. You don't need to hold it until the end, this will not influence the damage. Hitting the same target with multiple shots will reduce the damage by 15% each time, up to a minimum of 70% reduction. This can deal quite high damage to guards, but what's important is that you need to track them with the projectiles. They will not all fire at the same time, so you need to follow along with the movement of the enemy to hit as many projectiles as possible. This is one of the hardest mechanical parts of her kit and can make a massive difference between a beginner Tiamat and an experienced player. This ability is also her main clear with the highest base damage and scaling, but it requires you to stand somewhat in your own wave in order to get it off. The second ability is Urination. This places a triangle on the ground, which deals AoE damage. Inside the triangle is a smaller triangle that will deal additional damage, higher damage, which is slightly delayed and will also stun enemies that are in that area. However, the stun is only 1 second, so it's not enough to set up her 1 afterwards. Leveling this ability reduces the cooldown from 16 down to 12 seconds. Much like with her 1, landing the secondary part of this ability requires a decent amount of practice. Urination is large enough to hit a full wave if you place it right, but at the same time it deals higher damage if you only focus it on 3 minions, since the center damage is higher and especially scales higher in case you level it up. This is something I only found out today, so disregard me doing that wrong in the gameplays. On the other hand, often your 1 will almost entirely clear a wave, and you just need a bit of damage across the whole wave to finish off the minions, in which case you can use Urination on the full wave. The third ability is Grounding Dive, a forward leap that deals relatively low damage to enemies. However, the main purpose of this is that it also has stance swap into the melee stance. It's also a pretty solid escape with a range of 50 units. In addition to that, leveling this ability reduces the cooldown by 2 seconds per rank, which is massive to be honest. So it goes down from 22 seconds to 14 seconds at max rank. Tiamat's ultimate in this stance is essentially another stance swap in itself. It's a toggle that allows her to swap to a summoning form. The ability itself doesn't cost any mana or have any cooldowns, that is instead determined by the ability that you use afterwards. And that brings us to the summoning stance abilities. The first one is Summon Serpents. This places a spawner on the ground, which spawns serpents over time. These serpents have 2 health points each, and they will spawn in pairs of 2. A spawner will spawn up to 6 minions in 3 waves, unless it's destroyed by the enemy, or unless Tiamat has so much cooldown reduction that she places another spawner elsewhere before this one has run out. These serpents will attack nearby enemies and walk down lanes. While they only have 2 hit points, most abilities can only take one of those hit points away, and minions have to hit them 3 times to take away one of their hit points. Furthermore, these serpents apply a damage reduction effect to anything they hit, including guards. This is 10% to 30% depending on the rank of the ability. If these serpents kill anything in any lane, you're also provided with golden XP for that, so sometimes you can send them off to another lane to get some extra farm. The second ability in this form is Summon Beast. This summons a bull-like beast which will essentially guard an area. If an enemy comes close, then the bull will charge at that enemy, and this charge applies an 80% slow for 1 second, which is very nice to several other abilities or to chase someone who is getting away. The beast then locks onto the enemy and basic attacks them without slowing them further. These basic attacks actually scale with 15% of your magical power, so he can do some decent damage as well. The bull is also very tanky. He has a 250 health plus 100 per level, so up to 2250 health at level 20. He lasts for up to 30 seconds. Now while he does seem like an effective choice for fighting, there is another option, and that is Summon Storm. This summons a tornado that will chase after enemies and deal damage to them while they're inside of the area. This ability does higher damage than the beast, but it only lasts for 4 seconds. After 4 seconds, this ability will knock up enemies caught in the tornado. While this is classified as a knock-up, the enemy will only be knocked straight up if they are standing still. If they are moving in a direction, then they will be knocked further in that direction, so sometimes this can be a bit of a downside for chasing an enemy. Intuitively making the right choice between the beast and the storm is something that takes a fair bit of practice. Generally, I think the zoning capabilities of the storm in a team fight are greater since the beast normally just affects one enemy, and it's also easier to burst in a team fight. Switching over to the melee or ground stance, we get the last set of Tiamat's abilities. Her first ability here is Consume. This is a relatively short cone AoE that deals a reasonable but not overbearing amount of damage, and would slow enemies it hits by 25% for 1.5 seconds. Different from her one in flying stance, this ability goes down in cooldown by leveling it from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. Additionally, Consume comes with an execute effect against camps and minions. On rank 1 this is at 30% of the enemy's health, and on rank 5 this is at 50%. This can lead to situations where you will kill an enemy but they're still above the execute threshold, so this is worth keeping in mind. Consuming certain targets will also provide stacks of Tiamat's passive Hardened Scales, which gives you extra mitigation. This is for example the case for buff holders or for the oracles, but it doesn't apply for small lane minions. Additionally, you can consume your unsummons, your serpents or the beast in order to get stacks instantly. This is something that can sometimes be a bit of a downside because you might not want to consume them and might want them to keep hitting the enemy, but if you want to hit the enemy with your one, then you might end up consuming them anyways. The second ground ability is Outburst. This is a line ability that happens in multiple waves, similar to Pele's 2. Instead, it goes forward and knocks enemies up a tiny bit when they get hit by the ability. This travels relatively slowly but still faster than an enemy guard, so sometimes it can be just enough to slow them down and then slow them with Consume afterwards. Since Outburst has a range of 60 units, it can also be used to clear minion waves, though the damage is relatively low. Leveling this ability reduces the cooldown from 14 to 10 seconds. Tiamat's third ability in ground stance is Rising Flight, which is basically the reverse of Grounding Dive. This is what brings you back into the ranged mage stance. There's a very important distinction to be made here though. Grounding Dive is a forward leap that deals damage where you land. This means that you can get over walls with it. Rising Flight is a backwards dash, which means it cannot go through walls. This is important when trying to use this for escapes. The point of damage is also different, since this deals damage to enemies in front of you in a half circle when you fire the ability. The range is shorter as well. Instead of being 50 units, it's only 35. So generally, this is the less safe escape. The cooldown also scales down from 22 to 14 seconds. And the last ability in Tiamat's grounded stance, the ultimate, is Tempest of Undoing. This deals AoE damage in a very large radius of 30 units around Tiamat. In addition to that, the enemies that get hit by the ability take damage over time as well. For every enemy guard Tiamat hits with this, she also gains a stack of hardened scales, meaning that if you hit this in a team fight on multiple enemies, you can get a lot of mitigation very quickly. While this is one of Tiamat's ultimates, it only comes with a 20-second cooldown without cooldown reduction. That said, it also only deals up to 380 base damage with 50% scaling, which is not exactly high, especially since it's over time. From my experience so far, the primary usages of this are A, being a way to get stacks on hardened scales very quickly, and B, being a way to finish off enemies that got out of your melee range. Now that we finally got through all of the abilities, let's talk about the leveling order. It's important to note that Tiamat's leveling works a little bit differently from other stance swappers. If you, for example, level up the 1, it'll level up the 1 in your melee stance and in your range stance, but it will not level up the 1 in your summon stance. That is more comparable to something like Radiant's ult. So if you want to level up the summon abilities, you have to level your ultimate. This will level all 3 summon abilities as well as the ultimate in your melee stance. With that in mind, let's look at level 1 to 5. On the first level, you will typically want to level your 1. This is your strongest clearing ability, your highest damaging ability, and while there is a potential chance for the enemy to body block this, that'll also mean that they take pretty high damage at this point of the game. The 2 is safer, but it has significantly less damage on rank 1. On level 2, you have to make a choice. You can either put the first point into the 2 into Urination, that way you get additional clear and poke potential. Especially in middle lane, if you land a 2-1 combo, you actually have a pretty good first blood potential if the enemy is unaware of her damage potential at that point. The flip side of that is that you won't have an escape, and the only CC that you have is relatively hard to hit and short. The alternative is leveling the 3 on the second level. While this gives you less clear and pressure, it'll give you more safety and also let you access your 1 in your melee stance. On level 3, level whichever ability you haven't leveled yet. On level 4, put another point into the 1. This won't make much of a damage difference, but the rank after that will, and that's why we want to reach it as fast as possible. On level 5, you have to make a choice again. You can either get access to your ultimate, or you can choose to put another point into your 1. Putting another point into your 1 gives you almost 100 extra base damage on the ability due to the additional projectiles that you get, so it can be worth it. At the same time, I find myself backing around level 5 quite frequently to buy some items, and in that case I feel it's more worth it to level the ultimate, since that allows you to spawn some Serpents that will hold the lane for you. Since leveling the ultimate also gives you access to your melee stance ultimate, I typically prefer that, but both is possible. On level 6, once again level what you didn't level, either the 1 or the ultimate. On level 7, you put another point into the 1. Then on level 8, I would recommend point skipping and not leveling an ability. This allows you to max out the 1 on level 9 and also get another point into your ultimate. Maxing out the 1 is beneficial in that it allows you to get 2 additional projectiles on the 1, and this is not only good for clearing. This also means if you miss some projectiles on an enemy, you still deal higher damage overall because you have a higher chance to hit more of the projectiles when fighting other guards. Leveling the ultimate cuts 4 seconds of the cooldown of all summons, also increases their damage, and additional effects being the Serpents damage reduction. It also increases the damage of your melee stance ultimate quite drastically. After this point, there are 2 possible ways to go about the leveling priority. In either scenario, I would recommend maxing out the ultimate whenever possible. But when it comes to the 2 or the 3, the leveling is more flexible. Leveling the 2 will reduce the cooldown by 1 second and also pretty significantly increase the damage in the range stance, and also reduce the cooldown by 1 second in the melee stance and increase the damage there. Leveling the 3, however, will reduce the stance swap by 2 seconds in cooldown, and this cuts down pretty heavily from 22 seconds to 14 seconds. So what this allows you to do is swap stances more often and therefore deal more damage by swapping stances, and also have more impact on team fights at that point. So far my tendency has been to prioritize the 2 when I'm playing a more squishy mage focus build in middle lane, because then you won't stance swap quite as often or as aggressively, whereas when I'm playing solo and playing more bruiser, I will prioritize the 3, since I will often make more use of the stance swap to go in aggressively and then maybe back out again. And with that, we're done with leveling order. What we still have to talk about is playstyle and builds. That is what we'll do in the next video, which is or will be linked right here. If you see a card in the top right corner, then it'll be uploaded. If it's not there yet, feel free to click the sub button and the bell so that you get notified when it's uploaded, and also get notified of other upcoming SMITE videos. With that, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you for part 2 soon. ZiSotto, out.